Hello, Meg. Thank you for being here and sharing your VBAC birth story.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm very happy to be here. Happy to share my story because I love my birth story.
That's so empowering to hear. And gosh, VBAC stories are so powerful. And when you wrote in the form I had sent out to students, and you wrote so many details in your form, and I was like, she's got a lot to say. We need to sit down and talk because so many things about being in the water and making friends with the nurses and advocating for yourself and all of it. Even the knee position that you were in, everything. I was rereading that. So, first, maybe you can tell us a little bit about, first of all, where are you located?
Outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
Awesome. Good. I like to know. That's my husband's from Massachusetts. So there you go. I'm familiar.
There you go.
Amazing. Okay, so you had your first cesarean birth. You tried like all the things. You did two ECVs. Like, so tell us a little bit about that journey, and then how long, what's the gap between your babies?
My first child was breech, which I found out at around 28 weeks. And I was told, oh, that's early. She might flip. But she stayed breech. And despite all the things that you did, all the handstands in the pool and the ECVs, and she stayed that way. And I think she was just kind of stuck in a position. We did look into vaginal breech delivery, but, like the one care provider in the whole state who would do that was on vacation during her due date and just wasn't in the cards. So I felt actually at peace having done all of those things into scheduling the C-section and speaking with the doctor who would be performing it beforehand, and feeling as comfortable as I could. And so it was a very positive birth experience. My daughter was born with her foot in her mouth, which
Oh my
kind of
God.
showed me how pike position she really was.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just a very special moment, very spiritual, in that me and my husband Brett felt very connected. Yeah, when I think back to that birth, it was a great experience, but honestly, nothing compared to what I had in my second birth experience.
Mhm.
And then, so she's now almost 2.9. I think there's 2.5 years between her
Okay.
and my son.
Mhm.
So then when I got pregnant with him the second time around, the first thing I'm hoping and praying for, of course, is, oh, please be the head down.
Mhm. Mhm. And when did you find out in your pregnancy? Like, was it that 20-week ultrasound? And they're like, yeah, it looks like he's head down. And you're like, I hope he stays this way.
I mean, I made them check every single appointment 20 weeks,
Yeah.
28 weeks on. I was like,
Yeah.
no, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
So they got out their little ultrasound. And once I knew that he was, head down and he'd likely stay. That was just such a relief that at least now
Mm.
we're working with, I didn't
Yeah.
really even get the opportunity the first time around
Mhm.
to try for the birth experience that I had been hoping for.
Mhm. Oh, for sure. So did you have a hard time finding any providers who were supportive of your VBAC?
When I went to my 6-week visit after my first child, my daughter, so I'm only 6 weeks postpartum, and I'm asking my midwife, okay, where would you send me for a VBAC? Like, that's already on my
Mhm.
mind, is like, how can I achieve a VBAC the second time around? And she said, the hospital where I gave birth at for both of my children. I've heard only positive things about them. They have
Awesome.
a very strong VBAC rate, 80% success rate, which is, I think, amazing. They have a very prominent group of midwives who work there. And so I ended up staying with them.
Okay. So, I mean, it seems like it really does vary depending on where you live, which is why I like to ask where people are located, right? So, this is a hospital, like how far outside of Boston?
It's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so
Okay.
very close
Close.
to
Yeah.
the
Okay.
city of Boston. And not a lot of hospitals in the area do have like a birthing tub, for example. So they were maybe a little more progressive in some of the things that they would allow women to do. So they did have one birthing tub in the hospital, but I had been told that as a VBAC candidate, I could only labor in the tub and not actually give birth in it. But I thought it was still nice. And a lot of the things that they offer is just like standard protocol of care compared to some other areas of the United States, are much better. Like my sister was a labor and delivery nurse in Tennessee.
Oh,
and
wow.
I'd always tell her some of the things that were just standard at this hospital. And she'd always just have her mouth open like, what? They can do that? I'm like, yeah.
Wow. See, that just says a lot that your sister's an L&D nurse and she's just like surprised that you've got access to stuff, I guess, that maybe they don't have down in Tennessee. Interesting. So what would you say, because there's going to be, I imagine, quite a few people listening to this who are potentially hopeful for their own VBAC. So maybe you can share a little bit about your journey and, some things that maybe you could recommend for anyone who is hoping for a similar experience.
I was fortunate because the only reason I'd had a cesarean the first time around was because my child was breech. I know a lot of other women who have a lot more fears going into a VBAC because perhaps they had a really long labor and pushed for hours and then ended up going to the operating table and really need to work through that. And so that would be my number one advice, is just like take an assessment of where your mental state is and what are your fears, what birth trauma might you have experienced, and how are you going to work through that? Because fear is the enemy of birth. And I really believe, with a little bit of luck, but also with a good attitude and a mindset, that I was actually able to like influence how my birth experience ended up being. And I think if I had been afraid, which I wasn't, I didn't feel the feeling of fear throughout my birth experience. I think that's part of why it was so empowering to me. But if you're walking into the hospital or into your last few weeks of pregnancy afraid, that can really shape your overall experience.
Yeah, that's a big one. Dealing with fear, for sure. Fear is the enemy of birth. I love that you just said that. And it's true, right? If you think that, the tiger is going to come and attack you, like we're all biologically meant to sort of shut it down. Nervous system's like it's not safe, right? We're not going to be able to open up, if you will, and have our baby because we're so vulnerable in that moment.
Yes.
I love that you made the comment in your form that the nurses loved me. I was like, you go, girl. And you're like, they gave me the best room. And I'm like,
They did.
tell us how you went over the nurses, because unfortunately, I feel like there's so often this idea that like I'm gonna go into battle, right? Like especially if I'm going to have a VBAC, it's this idea that like, and unfortunately sometimes there are situations where you have to really, really fight for the ability to not be on your back and not have these, and it sounds like you are very supported. So let's talk about that.
I do think it starts prenatally. You can't just do no work beforehand and walk into the hospital and do your battle there. So it starts with a lot of conversations with the midwife or the OBGYN about what to expect. And so I showed my birth preferences I made appointments with multiple midwives and showed it to everyone saying, hey, what's your impression of this? Is there anything that you think might get pushback from the nurses or from the doctor, whoever? And just, being really prepared about what to expect and what's reasonable to ask and what someone, might not approve or whatever. So starting there, and then to the once we actually got into the hospital, I mean, just like being, a human and seeing, I think it helps me having two nurses, a sister-in-law and a sister, just like knowing that this is their job and they're just doing their thing. Like they're not the enemy. They're here to care for you. That's why they're a labor and delivery nurse. They should, most of them enjoy birth and babies and people. And so just, asking about them. And I guess I was lucky because the first time I interacted with the nurses, I was checking my amniotic fluid to make sure that my water had broken. So I wasn't like in the throes of labor. Like I was able to have chit-chatty conversations with them and find out about them. And so the same nurse who saw me to check my amniotic fluid was there 24 hours later when I was actually in labor and in the birth process. And I just think that she had connected with me. Oh, and I'd also remembered her from my first birth. I said,
Oh,
I really
wow.
think you were present at one of my ECVs. And so we chatted about my first child. And, it was just, we just got along. And so when we came into the hospital, because I had checked my amniotic fluid because my water had broken, I went back home to sleep for the night. And then we came back in the morning,
Mhm.
and she had kind of saved us.
Oh,
I think the best room, knowing that we'd be back in the
yeah.
morning, which is the one with the birthing tub
Right.
and this nice big window overlooking things. It was, yeah, really nice.
Oh, no, that is a really, and I think everybody just loves to support, I would assume, right? Like they really want you to have the birth of your dreams, right? Like you were really hopeful that you would be able to experience a VBAC after your last experience with a cesarean birth, right? So that's awesome. I love to hear that.
One of my preferences on my little birth preferences plan was that I'd love to labor in the tub. Although again, I didn't expect to get to give birth in the tub. But just having that and having talked over the birth preferences with my nurse, I think might have also influenced her giving me this room. She knew that I would like to labor in the tub. So
Mhm,
she was
mhm.
going to offer that to me. And then we'll get to the water birth maybe later, but this is the same nurse who advocated for me to be able to remain in the tub when it came time to push.
Oh, wow. I have shivers. I think we have to just get to that right away. What happened?
um, Things went quicker than we expected. To give the long story short, I thought I was still in early labor because my contractions were very slow to begin. And once they did, just weren't ramping up according to the machine that much. We weren't doing any cervical checks to try to avoid infection because of the premature rupture of membranes.
Mhm.
So we didn't really know where we were, but I guess I was in early labor. Like my doula hadn't even shown up to the hospital
Oh
yet.
my God. Classic.
Because we're like, you've got time,
Right.
we're still early. And but things intensified quickly. We call the doula, we're like, you got to get here. I'm thinking, I will never judge any woman who gets an epidural, because looking back now, this is my transition point where I'm hitting
Mhm,
my wall.
mhm,
And I'm like, what have I done? What have I gotten myself into? This is really hard. I need a change of pace. Let's get in the tub so
mhm.
I can get some relief. And once in the tub, I just feel like I have to push. It's just like this feeling of like, I thought I had a lot of pressure down there. I kept thinking I needed to poop. So I'd be
Oh,
sitting on
yep.
the
Yep.
potty and like laboring on the potty.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how am I going to stop pushing? And then I remembered your voice in my head, which is teaching the horse breathing. So I was like, okay, I feel like I have to push right now. And I turned to my doula, and she realizes, she's the one who realizes how far that I am. Like, oh, we didn't expect this, but I think you're pretty close. So she ran to go get the midwife to come and check me. And the baby's head is right there. You can feel hair and everything.
Mhm.
And she's like, oh my goodness, it is time to push. And I looked up, I'm in the tub,
Mhm.
and I say, am I allowed to give birth here?
Oh.
Um, because I'm such a rule follower. And I was like, oh, am I allowed to be here? Like, am I going to have to get out? And the midwife on duty was one who didn't frequently work at the hospital. She was like, I don't know, like, maybe part-time or something. So she wasn't as familiar with all of the policies. So she turns to the nurse and says, will you look it up for me? Is it a contraindication? And the nurse looks through and she's like, nope, it's not a contraindication. We should keep her in the tub. And she just, the nurse kind of looked at me and knew, like, you
Yeah.
want this and you're able to. And so we were like, okay. And I thought at the time they were breaking rules, but it turns out, no, technically it wasn't a
Okay.
contraindication. I was just perhaps the first VBAC candidate who'd ever given a
Yeah.
water birth.
Like honestly, I have shivers all over my body right now, knowing how hard it is to move when you can feel your baby's head. Like for you to have had to get out of a tub,
Yeah.
like in that moment would have been so hard. Like so hard. And I'm just so grateful to hear, happy to hear that they were like, yeah, we're gonna. And from that moment, like, how long did it take for baby to come out? From the time they were looking at the rule book or whatever, and baby was born. I mean, how long did that take?
I mean, 10 minutes. It was, yeah.
Wow.
So about 10 minutes of pushing. Yeah, so I'm also super grateful. I'd also, by that point, they wanted to give me Pitocin for a while. I'd advocated to push it off as long as possible, but they had attached me to the little, stand with I'd had 2 pit drips by then. I had the IV because I was a VBAC candidate. So I'm like, I've got things on me. I'm on in the tub on hands and knees. Like, I completely agree with you that it would have been really, I think it would have like broken momentum as well, just like completely changing pace.
So you
So
were connected? Wait, you were in the tub and you were connected to an IV pole while in the tub?
Yes.
How did you have your hands, like over the edge of the tub or in the water? I have so many questions.
I mean, they like taped me up with something, with a plastic bag. And they told me to try to keep it out of the water as much as possible. But I'm sure that it was in the water because I was just in, like, I was in, the mode of I'm about to give birth to my baby and I don't really care. Like, but that's part of, why I feel so grateful for this experience. It was just amazing. Like, I was truly like awestruck that not only had I been able to achieve the vaginal delivery that I was hoping for, but greater than I ever expected. And water birth would have been like a dream birth for me. You watch all these videos of these women completely natural, and that would have been a dream. But then because I was a VBAC candidate, just having to like, you have to have some of the interventions, like, sorry, that's a rule. You're going to be on an IV. But I think just having like the right mindset to not let that get to me and just be like, this is my birth experience. And it didn't really matter that I was hooked up to those things, because I was still allowed to have the baby in the bathtub. And it was
how is the
such a
monitoring?
special moment.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. I'm curious to know about the monitoring, because we often hear you need to be on continuous fetal monitoring if you're having a VBAC. So what was that like for you?
It was, I wish I knew the names better, but it was just like a little strap, like a pink and blue strap with a circle, so that it was completely waterproof and completely mobile.
Amazing.
And I would think that'd be an important thing to look for if you're going into a VBAC, and hoping to be able to be active during labor.
Yeah. So asking like, am I tethered to this machine, or is this a mobile continuous monitor? Got it. Okay. Oh my gosh. So what has your recovery been like this time, comparatively speaking?
I mean, anyone who's had a cesarean and a vaginal birth knows the answer to that. Like, it's night and day difference. Although I know there's a lot of, challenges and things that can happen as a result of vaginal birth, like extreme tearing or something. But for me, it was just so much easier. Like, I'm getting out of the bed, walking around, not in pain every time that I'm laughing. I mean, it's tiring because now I have a toddler and a newborn. So in that aspect's much more difficult. But then just the high that we were riding on, for just feeling so empowered and just, like I said, just being awestruck, that I'd been blessed with, just this experience. And the midwives would, while I was staying at the hospital for the next few days, a few different nurses and midwives would come in to meet me, who was the VBAC, accidental VBAC water birth is what they called me.
Oh my
Which
goodness.
I'm glad. I hope, that they're having conversations about it, and that it might even spark some change in midwives not being so quick to discourage it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So what advice, I always like to end with this question. What advice, if you could go back and give your pregnant self advice, what would that advice look like?
My pregnant self just needed to pack her hospital bags earlier and not assume that my baby would not come early.
Okay.
But yeah, I really actually would tell my pregnant self that I'm proud of you for the work that I put into preparing the classes like yours and others that I did, hiring the doula, taking prenatal yoga. Like, I mean, I really feel like I did a lot to surround myself with positive messaging and give myself the confidence that I needed to not be afraid and to take something that sounds frightening. I mean, uterine rupture, VBAC candidate, success versus failure, all of those things are scary terms, but they don't have to be. So when I face my fears head on, listening to podcasts, like really understanding what are the risks. You know, how likely is this uterine rupture thing? Oh, it's not that likely. What would it look like if it did happen? And once I was able to face them, then the fear wasn't there anymore. And I was able to just be a birthing person rather than a VBAC candidate.
I love that. I love that. So much, so many gems that you've shared with us, Meg. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I truly hope that you can ride this high, as you say, for the rest of your life. Let it allow you to feel empowered and strong and confident in your body and how capable you are.
Thank you, Nikki. And even thanks for your help in instilling some of the confidence in me.